Midnight Static Files. The story you are about to hear has its roots hidden in the darkness of reality. It's up to you to believe it or not.
Some places do not belong to the living. Deep within the isolated corners of Sylhet, hidden behind a veil of ancient trees and choking silence, lies a Dargah, built not by human hands, but by the command of the unseen. They say if you enter after twilight, you can hear them, the whispers of 1,000 invisible entities walking among the graves. But the true terror isn't what happens inside the shrine. It's what follows you home, locking its grip around your mind, refusing to let go until your entire life is reduced to absolute rubble. Tonight, we uncover 5 terrifying, true accounts of those who stepped across the border of our world and faced the wrath of the supernatural. Let us begin in the heart of Dargah Cantonment, in the quiet neighborhood of DOHS. The man who sent this story chose to keep his identity hidden for reasons that will soon become terrifyingly clear. He warns us from the very start, if you believe every dark story ends with a peaceful resolution, you are dead wrong. For him, the storm has stopped, but he is still standing among the ruins of his destroyed life. It all began in 2022. Through a mutual friend, he met a girl. It started as an ordinary friendship, daily conversations, shared laughs, the casual routine of 2 people enjoying each other's company. But silently, imperceptibly, that friendship deepened into an intense, profound love. When their families noticed the bond growing between them, his mother stepped in with traditional, loving wisdom. She told him that their family didn't believe in long, unnecessary courtships. If he truly loved the girl, he should marry her. The advice was perfectly logical. He loved her deeply. So why wait? When he proposed, she didn't hesitate for even 2 seconds. It was as if she had been waiting for that exact moment, her face lighting up with absolute joy. She urged him to have his mother send the formal marriage proposal to her family that very day. From there, everything moved with an almost supernatural speed. The families met, and the connection was instant. His future mother-in-law was so thoroughly charmed that she invited them over for lunch the very next afternoon. He, his mother, and his younger sister visited their home, meeting the girl's mother and older brother in a warm, informal gathering. It was beautiful, seamless, and filled with laughter. Looking back now, he realizes that the ease of the beginning was nothing more than the deceptive, suffocating calm that precedes a catastrophic Kalbaisaki storm. The wedding date was set, and the families were overjoyed. His mother couldn't stop praising the bride, calling her a true blessing, a Lakshmi girl. His mother-in-law viewed him as the direct answer to her lifelong prayers. The marriage was solemnized, but by mutual agreement, they decided to wait 2 months before holding the formal ceremony to bring her into his home. Those 2 months were, without a doubt, the most beautiful, untroubled days of his married life. He had no idea of the horrific test that was already waiting for them in the dark. The first warning sign arrived on the very morning of the wedding ceremony. In his room, he kept a pair of lovebirds in a cage. They were his absolute favorites, chirping relentlessly throughout the day, filling the space with a strange, vibrant joy. That morning, the house was a chaotic blur of wedding guests, catering, and frantic preparations. He was too busy to even step into his bedroom. The door was locked tight, the windows were shut fast, and there was absolutely no way for any person or animal to enter from the outside. When he finally unlocked the door to get ready for the ceremony, he stepped inside and felt his heart instantly sink into his chest. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the cage. One of his beloved lovebirds was lying motionless on the floor. But it hadn't just died of natural causes. Its neck had been completely, violently twisted. He froze. His throat went entirely dry and wooden. He had heard the bird chirping just hours earlier that very morning. Someone, or something, had deliberately broken its neck. But how? The cage was perfectly intact. The windows were sealed, and no stray animal could have breached the room. A wave of dread washed over him, but given the immense pressure of his wedding day, he forced the terror down and managed to pull himself together. Within 2 or 3 days, the remaining bird died as well. Once the wedding festivities concluded, the young couple made a decision to start their life together in a rented apartment, completely independent from their parents. Determined to be honorable, he told his bride that he would not accept even a single matchstick from her family as a dowry. She agreed, but placed one firm condition on their arrangement. Since they were refusing all outside help, they had to build their home entirely from scratch, on their own terms. It sounded like a dream. Together, they found an apartment. It was incredibly messy and neglected when they first signed the lease, but they put on masks, grabbed brooms, and spent hours cleaning every corner together. Even now, remembering the pure, unblemished chemistry they shared during those initial days brings tears to his eyes. They were the perfect couple, the kind of partners others looked at with envy and admiration. 2 months passed in blissful harmony, and they officially moved in. But the very first day they returned to his parents' house for a celebratory family visit, a dark shift occurred. His wife had a hobby of taking their beautiful wedding photos and transforming them into large, striking artistic pieces. She'd made a massive, beautifully framed painting of their wedding day and gifted it to him. When his mother saw it, she was so deeply captivated by its beauty that she insisted on keeping it. She wanted to hang it prominently in her drawing room to show guests, and they happily agreed. The evening was filled with relatives, laughter, and a joyous atmosphere celebrating the new bride. But the moment they unlocked the door to their own apartment that night, an explosive, venomous argument erupted between them. To this day, he cannot remember what triggered it. It was completely senseless, yet within 30 minutes, the fury reached such an unnatural, terrifying peak that they were screaming about getting a divorce. It was entirely out of character. Both of them had completely lost control of their minds, their eyes bulging and faces turning a violent, unnatural red with rage. Blinded by anger, he stormed out of the room and sat alone in the dark kitchen. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was his mother. The moment he answered, she burst into hysterical, breathless crying, screaming through her tears, asking if he was okay, begging to know if something terrible had happened to him. He was stunned. He couldn't bring himself to tell her that his marriage was disintegrating after only a few weeks, so he lied, insisting they were perfectly fine. But his mother wept louder, her voice shaking violently. She said, "My son, exactly 10 minutes after you stepped out of our front door, that massive wedding painting hanging in the drawing room suddenly flew off the wall and crashed onto the floor, shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces." A violent wave of electricity surged through his entire body. He tried to rationalize it to his mother, blaming a sudden gust of wind or a loose nail, but deep within his chest, a cold voice told him this was something sinister. Mothers possess a profound sixth sense, and she knew a terrible curse had just settled over her son's life. The days that followed in the new house grew increasingly unsettling. He was a late sleeper while his wife would fall asleep early. One night, as he sat awake in the pitch-black bedroom, he heard her snoring loudly. He used to tease her about it, though she always angrily denied ever snoring in her life. Assuming she was simply exhausted from household chores, he ignored it at first. But a few nights later, while the bedroom lights were fully on and he was wide awake, the heavy, rhythmic snoring sound echoed through the room again. He leaned down closely over his wife's face to listen, and the blood instantly froze in his veins. The sound wasn't coming from her lips, it was coming from the pitch-black, empty corner of the bedroom. His chest throbbed with raw terror. It felt as though someone had driven massive iron nails through his feet, pinning him to the floorboards. He couldn't move an inch. He knew with absolute certainty that they were not alone in that house. To protect his wife from the paralyzing fear that gripped him, he kept the horrifying discovery to himself, remaining silent while the shadow over their home grew larger. The manifestations began to accelerate with terrifying intensity. One evening, while they were sitting quietly on the couch watching a movie, the violent sound of shattering porcelain erupted from the dining area, as if every single plate and glass on the table had been smashed to the floor. He leaped up and sprinted to the dining room, only to find the table perfectly arranged, every dish completely untouched. Then came the morning he walked into the kitchen and found the gas stove switch turned completely on, filling the air with a silent, deadly hazard. The windows had been securely closed all night. If he had struck a single match to light his morning tea, the entire apartment would have instantly exploded into an inferno. Alongside these physical disturbances, their arguments grew with a geometric, venomous fury. They would hurl the most degrading, cruel insults at one another, completely blinded by rage. But the moment the fury subsided, neither of them could remember a single detail of what had triggered the fight. In the midst of this living nightmare, a flicker of hope arrived. His wife became pregnant. For the first 2 or 3 months, a fragile peace settled over the household. The constant quarreling ceased, and they poured all their energy into caring for one another and protecting the new life growing inside her. Yet, the oppressive, heavy atmosphere of the apartment remained entirely unchanged. Driven by a father's instinct to protect his unborn child, he made the difficult decision to abandon the dream home they had built and split their time living between their parents' houses. But moving didn't break the curse. Throughout the entire pregnancy, he could feel an invisible, malicious force tracking their every move, fighting desperately to tear them apart and end their bloodline. Complications began to plague his wife's health. During a routine checkup, the doctor's face went completely pale, delivering a crushing blow. The baby's heartbeat could no longer be detected. It felt as though a massive sledgehammer had struck him directly in the skull, stopping the entire world around him. They frantically rushed from hospital to hospital, desperate for a miracle, and by the mercy of the Almighty, the heartbeat returned. Yet, the torment shifted directly onto his wife's body. Her health would violently deteriorate into near-fatal conditions, leaving specialists utterly baffled, only for her reports to return completely normal the very next morning. In the final 2 months, the nightmare intensified as the baby's growth suddenly ground to a complete halt. During a sudden emergency checkup, the doctor looked at the scans and ordered an immediate delivery, warning them that the baby's heart was failing and she would need to be rushed straight to the neonatal intensive care unit. He went completely mad with fear, weeping and begging for divine protection. When the delivery was finished, the doctors emerged with a beautiful baby girl, completely healthy, defying every medical warning. Relief washed over him, but as he held his daughter, the lead doctor pulled him aside, whispering a strange, chilling warning. "The child is safe, but do not speak of her health or share her joy too loudly with others. It attracts dangerous attention." He paid the warning little mind, entirely consumed by the joy of their survival, but he had no idea that the real game was only just beginning. Now that the child was born, the invisible force shifted its relentless focus away from the baby and locked its sights entirely onto him. It was as if the entity was punishing him for repeatedly challenging its presence. It never manifested before him face to face. Instead, it began systematically severing his roots from the inside out. One afternoon, while sitting at his office desk, a sudden horrifying sensation seized his brain. It felt as though a razor-sharp knife was trapped inside a taut balloon within his skull, violently slashing to burst its way out. A crushing weight, like several tons of solid stone, dropped onto his shoulders. He opened his mouth to scream for help, to call out to his colleagues sitting just feet away, but his jaw locked completely, and no sound emerged. From that day forward, his body was never normal again. His emotional regulation plummeted to zero. The calm, compromising man he used to be vanished entirely. When his wife spoke, an aggressive foreign voice inside his mind provoked him to fight, driving him to destroy everything they had built. He underwent expensive MRIs and extensive neurological testing, but every medical report came back flawless. Yet the agonizing pressure in his skull attacked him 4 or 5 times a day, seizing him while driving or during critical executive meetings. Eventually, the company's HR department called him into a private room, informing him that because of his unexplainable severe panic attacks, the company could no longer take liability for him. He was forced into mandatory leave, staring down the barrel of unemployment while his entire world turned upside down. In a desperate bid to escape, they relocated to yet another apartment, promising themselves they would ignore anything paranormal. If a bulb shattered, it was bad wiring. If a pipe leaked, it was poor plumbing. But exactly 1 month into the new home, the entities reclaimed their territory. The moment he fixed a light fixture in one room, the fan in the next would violently seize. One evening, a massive, deafening explosion rocked the apartment, shaking the very foundations of the building. He ran into the drawing room and found the heavy main doorbell completely charred and melted to the wall. The next day, an electrician inspected the entire grid and left trembling, confirming the voltage hadn't fluctuated by a single watt. Then, a bizarre and repulsive physical affliction took root in his body. If he caught even the faintest scent of water, his internal organs would feel as though they were melting into ash, forcing him to sprint to the washroom in blinding agony. Drinking a simple glass of water became an act of pure torture. He spent a fortune visiting the most renowned urologists and senior professors in the city, consuming heavy cycles of antibiotics, but every specialist gave the exact same answer: there is absolutely nothing wrong with your body. Medical science was entirely useless against a spiritual curse. Meanwhile, the financial ruin deepened as his wife was suddenly laid off from her job for no logical reason. This pattern repeated 4 times in a row across different companies, plunging them into absolute poverty. His physical appearance decayed rapidly. His weight ballooned unnaturally, and he aged 25 years in a matter of months, looking like a broken, elderly stranger in the mirror. Unable to bear the agony, he finally confessed the entire haunting to his mother. Horrified, she put him in touch with a powerful Islamic scholar and reciter of the Quran. The Qari instructed him to play a powerful audio recording of Ruqya through his home speakers the following morning. The next morning, as breakfast was cooking in the kitchen, he casually connected his phone to the speaker and hit play. Within mere seconds of the holy verses vibrating through the air, an agonizing, violent sensation gripped him. It felt as though a massive syringe had punctured his big toes and was violently sucking every ounce of life force and energy out of his body, straight through the top of his head. He collapsed onto the mattress with a sickening thud. His limbs became entirely paralyzed, pinning him flat as his chest tightened to the point of suffocation. Absolute terror convinced him that if the recitation continued for another minute, he would remain a paralyzed vegetable forever. Summoning every remaining ounce of strength, he screamed a guttural cry to his wife. "Stop it! Turn it off!" She sprinted into the room and cut the power to the speaker. Slowly, agonizingly, the oppressive weight lifted, and his strength crawled back into his limbs. The experience was so deeply traumatizing that he never dared to call the scholar again, even after his mother explained that the Qari had warned such a violent reaction would happen as the entity fought to stay inside him. By the dawn of 2024, the structural integrity of his marriage collapsed entirely under the weight of the haunting. His wife took their infant daughter and fled to her father's home, initiating a painful, freezing separation that dragged on for nearly 3 months. He was left utterly alone in the quiet apartment, completely broken. He missed his daughter desperately. She was the absolute light of his life, and the emptiness of her room robbed him of any ability to sleep at night. Yet, despite the toxic arguments and the invisible wall growing between them, the tragic truth was that they still loved each other deeply. In a desperate final bid to heal their fractured bond, they decided to plan a getaway. They had never gone on a proper honeymoon after their wedding, so they arranged a trip into the serene, quiet mountains, hoping the fresh air and new environment would wash away the dark curse. All the bookings were finalized, and their flight was scheduled to depart in exactly 2 days. But the entities would not allow them to escape. Exactly 48 hours before their departure, a sudden, entirely irrational and meaningless argument ignited out of nowhere. Within minutes, the hostility escalated far beyond anything they had experienced before. He completely lost control of his senses, blinded by an invasive rage, and his wife, consumed by the same dark malice, grabbed her daughter's hard plastic toys and charged at him in a violent frenzy. Trying to protect his face, he threw his hands up and pushed her away. The physical escalation shattered the last remaining boundary. She packed her bags, walked out of the house with their child, and returned to her father. This time, the families intervened with absolute finality, forbidding any further communication between the two. He tried to soothe his panic, telling himself that this was just like their previous fights, that once her anger subsided, they would find a way back to each other. But the very next evening, his father-in-law called his cell phone with a cold, devastating declaration. The divorce papers were being drawn up. He was completely paralyzed, staring blankly into the dark. He had known their lives were chaotic, but he had never dreamed the relationship would end so completely. Desperate, his father called her family to plead for a reconciliation, but the door was firmly shut. Later, he discovered a heartbreaking truth. His wife had genuinely wanted to talk to him one last time to save the marriage. But a sinister, invisible force blocked them at every turn. Whenever they attempted to speak on the phone, a sudden, inexplicable surge of venomous anger would grip both of them within 2 minutes, forcing them to hurl cruel curses at each other and slam the phone down. The divorce was finalized. In the blink of an eye, his beautifully arranged home, his beloved wife, and his precious daughter were entirely shattered into dust. The trauma left him unable to exist within the borders of Dargah. Every street corner, every heavy shadow, and every familiar scent reminded him of the family he had lost. He abruptly quit his job and relocated to a distant, unfamiliar city, praying that crossing the geographic boundary would break the invisible anchor of the curse. But he was utterly wrong. 2 years have passed since the finality of the divorce, and the haunting has only grown more aggressive in his isolated new apartment. He recently learned that his ex-wife still suffers from severe, paralyzing depression and misses him deeply, but the knowledge brings no comfort, for he is now a prisoner within his own physical flesh. There are days when he lacks the physical strength to even lift his torso out of bed. When he attempts to stand, his sense of balance vanishes, and his feet slide out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. His vision remains perpetually blurry, clouding his surroundings in a thick, unnatural haze. His new building sits in a profoundly isolated, quiet area, completely detached from busy marketplaces or hotels. Yet, every single night, at the exact same hour, the dead silence of his apartment is broken by a terrifying auditory manifestation. Out of nowhere, right in the center of his locked bedroom, a singular, violently loud clapping sound echoes through the air. And exactly 2 seconds after that clap, the room fills with the sound of 8 to 10 distinct people standing in the darkness, whispering intensely among themselves. He cannot comprehend the ancient, bizarre language they speak, but he can hear them perfectly, moving closer, surrounding his bed, and conversing in low, frantic tones. This horrifying council remains inside his room, whispering in the dark, until the very moment the morning call to prayer echoes from the local mosque. Even when the dawn azan forces the whispers to fade and sleep finally claims him, his mind finds no refuge. The nightmares that hunt him are thick with blood and disturbing symbolism. Every single night, he sees himself dressed in pristine, clean clothes, sitting silently on a cold floor. Arranged in a tight, suffocating circle all around him are massive, glistening pieces of raw meat, cut precisely like sacrificial animals. When he looks down in the dream, his own hands are completely dripping with warm, thick blood. He wakes up shivering, suffocating, unable to decipher what these horrifying omens mean. Knowing that medical science has completely abandoned him, he stopped visiting doctors entirely. A few weeks ago, the curse paralyzed his limbs so severely that he lay trapped in his bed for 4 days straight, lacking even the basic strength to drag his body to the toilet. He lay there in the dim light, staring indifferently at the ceiling, waiting with a numb, hopeless despair for the sun to drop, for that singular loud clap to echo through the empty room, and for the unseen council to begin their late-night whispering. One night, unable to carry the terrifying weight of the isolation any longer, he dialed his mother's number. Hearing the breathless panic and weak cadence in her son's voice, she began to weep bitterly. Too exhausted to hold the device to his ear, he left the phone on active speaker right next to his pillow, closed his heavy eyes, and drifted into a fitful unconsciousness. The next afternoon, his mother called him back, her voice shaking with an unadulterated, primal terror that he had never heard before. She gasped through her tears. "My son, you must abandon that apartment immediately. Pack your bags and run." Confused and weak, he asked her what was wrong. She confessed that after he had fallen asleep with the speaker on, she stayed on the line, refusing to hang up on her suffering child. In the dead of night, through the small phone speaker, she clearly heard the sudden violent clap, and then the unmistakable sound of a large crowd of people suddenly materializing inside his room, speaking all at once in a heavy, overlapping torrent of whispers. A psychological avalanche crashed through his mind. He wasn't losing his sanity. He wasn't suffering from intricate hallucinations brought on by stress or exhaustion. The phenomenon was objective, real, and terrifyingly alive. The entities were physically occupying the space around his bed, loud enough to be transmitted across a cellular network. From that night onward, his parents became consumed by panic, calling his phone every 5 minutes, begging to know if he was still breathing, desperate to force him out of that cursed city. But a strange, heavy inertia has completely taken root within his soul. A dark psychological paralysis makes him stubbornly refuse to leave the apartment. Whenever his mother begs him to escape, he simply mutters in a dull, monotone voice, "I'm okay, Mom. There is no problem here." That is his reality today. Through this platform, he shares his ongoing torment with a final, desperate plea. Please pray for him. He simply wants to be a little better, to feel a glimmer of the light he once knew. An absolute suffocating despair has conquered his mind. When he had the time and the love to fix his life, the unseen forces tore the opportunities away, methodically separating him from his wife and the daughter who was the apple of his eye. Today, he has suffered so deeply, lost so much, that he feels there is absolutely nothing left in this world to keep him alive. The first story ends here, frozen in an ongoing struggle with no resolution in sight. For some curses, there is no final curtain. Now let us turn our gaze back 25 years into the past, to an account sent by a woman named Nazia, residing in the Jinn Dargah district of Sylhet. Her story introduces us to a different facet of the unseen world, where a desperate desire for a miracle can lead a soul to a sacred place, only for a dark, parasitic shadow to attach itself to the bloodline. 25 years ago, Nazia was a young woman trapped in a state of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. She had been happily married to her cousin Noman for nearly 5 years, but their home remained painfully quiet. There was no sound of a child's laughter. They had visited countless specialists, undergone medical checkups, and offered endless prayers. Yet every report confirmed that both of them were perfectly healthy. It was simply a delay from the Almighty. But the world is rarely patient. Relatives and neighbors began whispering in Noman's ear, callously advising him to take a second wife so he could finally have an heir. The cruel suggestions broke Nazia's spirit. She would lock herself away, weeping like a completely helpless person, wondering why people could be so deeply unfeeling. In her pain, she turned entirely to faith and charity. She made a solemn vow to perform every good deed she could, hoping that the raw gratitude of someone she helped would move the heavens to finally fill her empty lap. One sweltering, suffocating afternoon, as she stood by her veranda seeking a breath of fresh air, she heard a frail, trembling voice echoing from the street below. It was an elderly Huzur, visibly exhausted, begging for food and assistance in the holy name of Allah. Sensing an opportunity for a sincere blessing, Nazia opened her front door and called out to him, asking what he wished to eat. The old man smiled with profound relief, confessing he was starving. Nazia hurried into her kitchen, preparing a generous plate of warm bread, rich curry, and fresh water. The Huzur ate with immense gratitude. As he handed back the empty plate, he looked deeply into her eyes and said, "Mother, you are carrying a massive, suffocating weight. Your very eyes reveal that your soul is in deep torment. May the Almighty remove your pain." Bursting into tears, Nazia pleaded, "Huzur, please pray for me. Pray that Allah finally fills my empty lap. I cannot bear this crushing grief any longer." The elderly man looked at her softly and whispered, "Do not despair. The Creator is boundlessly merciful. Listen to me closely. Deep within the isolated interior of Sylhet, hidden far from the modern world, lies an ancient Dargah. It is a place where desperate prayers are directly answered. You must travel there on a Thursday. Leave an offering of pure white sweets, ask for your blessing, and you will see your lifelong hope fulfilled." With those parting words, the mysterious old man turned and vanished down the street. His words burned into Nazia's mind like a branding iron. For a drowning soul, even a single straw feels like a lifeline. That evening, the moment Noman returned from work, she frantically relayed the entire encounter, Noman smiled gently, trying to ground her, muttering that chasing mystical shrines was all they had left to do. But Natsia was desperate. She begged him to accompany her, pointing out that even if the village was isolated, it was still within the borders of Bangladesh. Overwhelmed by his wife's tears, Noman finally relented, securing 2 days of leave from his office. To avoid the judgmental glare of their extended family, they concocted a lie, telling Noman's parents that they were traveling to Sylhet to attend a cousin's wedding. When they purchased heavy boxes of traditional sweets, the in-laws accepted the story without a single suspicion. They caught a bus to Sylhet town, arriving at the home of Noman's aunt, Bilkis. The moment they revealed their true destination, Aunt Bilkis's face shifted into an expression of deep gravity. She looked at them and whispered, "We know of that darbar, but it is located in a profoundly remote, ancient village deep in the interior. The journey is long and dangerous, but more importantly, you must understand, that is no ordinary shrine. It is widely known as the Dargah of the Jinns. The elders claim that hundreds of years ago, the great Pir who resided there commanded a massive clan of Jinns, and by the absolute decree of Allah, those unseen entities built that entirely white structure overnight." Aunt Bilkis leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper. "The elders warn that the entities still guard that holy ground. If you go there with a pure heart and humble intentions, you will receive your miracle. But if you show even a shred of disrespect, or if your mind wanders into dark thoughts, the wrath of the unseen will attach itself to you like a parasite, and it will follow you back to the city." The warning sent a cold shiver down Natsia's spine, but her desperation for a child completely overpowered her fear. The very next morning, a Thursday, the couple woke up before dawn, packed the boxes of white sweets, and began their journey into the deep interior of Sylhet. The travel was grueling. They rode in a cramped, rattling local bus for hours, watched the modern roads dissolve into rough dirt paths, and eventually had to hire a rustic auto rickshaw to take them to the outermost edge of the isolated village. By the time the rickshaw driver pulled over and refused to go any further, the sun was already beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. He pointed down a narrow, overgrown dirt path swallowed by an imposing dense canopy of ancient trees. "The Dargah is at the end of this path, deep inside the woods," the driver said, his eyes scanning the darkening sky nervously. "But hear me well, travelers. You must complete your prayers and turn back before twilight. Nobody from our village stays near those woods after dark. When the sun sets, that place belongs entirely to them." With the driver's ominous words ringing in their ears, Natsia and Noman hurried down the path. The air beneath the thick trees felt heavy and unnaturally cold. The usual sounds of rural Bangladesh, the distant chatter of villagers, the barking of dogs, the ambient rustle of wildlife vanished entirely, replaced by a suffocating absolute silence. After walking for nearly 20 minutes, the dense tree line suddenly broke open, revealing a massive cleared courtyard. In the exact center stood the Dargah. It was a stunning, low-slung structure built entirely out of smooth, brilliant white stone that seemed to catch the fading daylight with an eerie, luminous glow. Surrounding the shrine were ancient graves, their headstones covered in dark moss, tilting at strange, unnatural angles. What struck Noman immediately was the total isolation. Usually, any prominent shrine in Bangladesh is teeming with people. Qadims waiting to take donations, vendors selling rose water and candles, and dozens of devotees offering prayers. But here, there was not a single human soul in sight. The entire complex was abandoned, yet it was meticulously clean, as if a large crowd of invisible caretakers had swept the marble floors just moments before their arrival. Nasia felt an intense, overwhelming spiritual energy wash over her. Gripping the box of white sweets tightly against her chest, she approached the threshold of the main shrine. Noman followed closely behind, a growing sense of unease tightening in his throat. They stepped inside the cool white interior where the air smelled faintly of ancient earth and burning incense, though no incense sticks were visible. Kneeling before the draped tomb of the ancient saint, Nasia closed her eyes and wept. She poured her entire soul into her prayer, begging the Almighty through the blessings of this holy place to grant her a child. She opened the box, placing the pristine white sweets as an offering at the foot of the shrine. While Nasia was completely lost in her emotional plea, Noman stepped back into the open courtyard to keep watch. He looked up and realized, with a sudden jolt of panic, that twilight had arrived. The sky had shifted into a deep, bruised purple, and the shadows of the surrounding forest were stretching aggressively across the white marble floor. Suddenly, a bizarre physical sensation gripped Noman's entire body. The hair on the back of his neck stood completely on end. He felt an intense burning pressure radiating from the dark woods, as if hundreds of hidden eyes had just materialized behind the ancient trees, locking their gaze directly onto him. He turned around to call out to his wife, but the words died in his throat. There, standing just a few feet away from him in the dim purplish light of the courtyard, was a figure. It was an old man, dressed in a spotless stark white Punjabi and matching lungi. He was holding a large broom, silently sweeping the mossy ground near one of the ancient graves. Noman let out a long, ragged breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He assumed this must be the Qadim, the official caretaker of the shrine, who had somehow arrived without making a sound. Noman took a step forward, raising his hands in a respectful greeting. "Assalamu alaikum, Chacha," he called out, his voice slightly shaking in the heavy silence. The old man didn't stop sweeping. He didn't even lift his head. He simply kept moving the broom back and forth against the earth, his movements completely rhythmic and mechanical. But then, in a voice that sounded like grinding stones echoing from deep underwater, he spoke. "You must leave. Right now. Why have you stayed after the sun has set?" Noman felt a cold bead of sweat roll down his temple. "My wife is just finishing her prayers inside," he explained quickly, casting an anxious glance back toward the white structure. "We will take our leave in just a moment." Slowly, the old man stopped sweeping. He began to turn his torso toward Noman, but his neck remained completely stiff, tilting at a bizarre, unnatural angle. As the dim purple light caught his face, Noman's lungs completely seized. The old man's eyes were not human. They were completely, entirely black, with no whites or pupils visible, reflecting the dark twilight like two pools of stagnant oil. And though he was standing several feet away, Noman could distinctly smell a heavy, suffocating odor of ancient decay and burning sulfur radiating from him. "She is not praying alone," the figure whispered, a grotesque, wide smile stretching across his face, revealing rows of jagged, unnaturally dark teeth. "They are accepting her offering, and they have decided to accept you as well." A primal, paralyzing terror locked Noman's limbs. He wanted to scream, to run, but his voice was completely gone. At that exact moment, Nausea stepped out of the white shrine, her face tear-stained but radiant with a strange, calm peace. The second her footsteps echoed on the marble threshold, the heavy spell broke. Noman lunged forward, grabbed his wife's wrist with a crushing grip, and began violently dragging her toward the narrow forest path. "No, man, what are you doing? You're hurting me!" Nausea cried out in confusion, stumbling over her long sari as he pulled her forward. "Don't look back!" Noman screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic as he sprinted into the pitch-black canopy of the trees. "Just run! Do not look behind you for any reason!" They sprinted through the dark woods like mad people, the heavy branches clawing at their clothes and scratching their faces. All around them, the absolute silence of the forest had vanished, replaced by a terrifying, chaotic cacophony. High up in the ancient trees, they could hear the sound of heavy, unseen bodies leaping from branch to branch, tracking their movement. Low, mocking laughter and a strange, clicking language echoed from the deep shadows on either side of the dirt path. By the time they finally burst out of the tree line and collapsed onto the main dirt road, they were bleeding, exhausted, and completely covered in dust. To their absolute relief, the rustic auto rickshaw driver was still waiting, pacing nervously by his vehicle. The moment he saw their frantic, terrified faces, he didn't ask a single question. He started the engine instantly, slammed on the gas, and sped away from those accursed woods as fast as the vehicle could carry them. During the entire grueling journey back to Dargah, Noman remained completely silent, staring blankly out of the window, his body shivering uncontrollably. He didn't tell Nausea about the black-eyed caretaker or the terrifying warning he had received. He prayed with all his might that they had escaped the borders of that ancient village in time, and that the nightmare was left behind in the deep interior of Sylhet. And for a while, it truly seemed like their prayers had been answered. Exactly 1 month after their return from the Dargah, Nazia began to feel intensely nauseous in the mornings. With a heart pounding with both hope and dread, Nazia took a pregnancy test. When the 2 solid pink lines slowly materialized, she burst into a flood of tears, falling to her knees in profound gratitude. The miracle had been granted. The ancient Dargah had answered her deepest, most desperate plea. Noman, too, was overcome with emotion, weeping as he held his wife, pushing the terrifying memories of that purple twilight into the furthest corners of his mind. The dark warning of the black-eyed caretaker seemed like nothing more than a bad dream, completely eclipsed by the impending arrival of their child. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, defying every previous medical delay. 9 months later, Nazia gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. They named him Fahim. He was the absolute center of their universe, a radiant child with striking, deep-set eyes that seemed older and wiser than his infant body suggested. Noman's family was overjoyed. The cruel whispers of the neighbors instantly transformed into high praise and celebration. The quiet house was finally filled with the beautiful music of a child's laughter. But the entities of the unseen world never grant a miracle for free. They simply wait for the perfect moment to collect their debt. The first shift occurred when Fahim turned 3 years old. He was a highly intelligent child, learning to speak much earlier than other children his age, but his language began to take a bizarre, unsettling turn. Nazia would often find him sitting completely alone in the center of his pitch-black bedroom, staring intently at the empty corner, carrying on long, fluid conversations. When she would step inside and flick the lights on, Fahim would look up at her with a calm, unblinking expression. When Nazia gently asked him who he was speaking to, the toddler would simply smile and point his tiny finger into the empty air. "I am talking to the white grandfathers, Ma," he would whisper softly. "They come from the woods. They say they built a beautiful white house for me, and they are just waiting for me to grow up so they can take me back." A suffocating, icy dread wrapped around Nazia's heart. The image of the brilliant white Dargah and the dense, terrifying canopy of the Sylhet forest flashed vividly before her eyes. She frantically tried to dismiss it, convincing herself that it was merely the overactive imagination of a young child mimicking the religious stories he heard from his grandparents. But Noman knew better. The memory of the caretaker's gravelly voice returned to haunt him. "They have decided to accept you as well." As Fahim grew older, the manifestations transformed from unsettling childhood chatter into a violent physical nightmare. By the time he reached the age of 7, the boy began experiencing severe, terrifying nocturnal episodes. Every Thursday night, the exact day of the week they had stepped onto the holy ground of the Dargah, Fahim's body would suddenly go completely rigid in his sleep. Nazia and Noman would be woken in the dead of night by a strange, rhythmic sound echoing from their son's room. When they rushed inside, they would find Fahim sitting straight up in his bed, his eyes wide open, completely rolled back into his head so that only the stark white of his sclera was visible. His tiny jaws would slide back and forth, grinding his teeth together with such an unnatural, crushing force that the sound resembled heavy stones being violently pulverized underwater. No matter how loudly they screamed his name, no matter how frantically they shook his rigid shoulders, the boy remained completely trapped in his terrifying trance, entirely unresponsive to the physical world. And as they stood over his bed in raw panic, the temperature in the room would violently plummet to a freezing, sub-zero chill, and the distinct, unmistakable odor of ancient earth and burning sulfur would fill the air. Desperate to save their only child, the couple began a frantic, agonizing journey through both medical science and spiritual healing. They took Fahim to the most prominent pediatric neurologists in Dhaka, subjecting the poor boy to endless EEGs, brain scans, and sleep studies. But just like the victim in our first account, every single medical report came back flawless. The doctors found absolutely no signs of epilepsy, neurological disorders, or night terrors. Physically, the boy was in perfect health. When medicine failed, they turned to the spiritual realm. They brought powerful Islamic scholars, spiritual healers, and renowned imams into their home to to perform prayers and recitations over the boy. But the moment the holy verses were recited in Fahim's presence, the entity inside him would react with a venomous, terrifying fury. The young, soft-spoken boy would open his mouth, and a voice that did not belong to a human child, a heavy dual-tone roar that vibrated the very glass panes of the windows, would mock the healers, screaming that the boy's soul had already been signed away at the white stone threshold in Sylhet. The years bled into one another, and the curse showed absolutely no mercy. Today, Fahim is 24 years old, a grown man whose entire youth has been systematically consumed by the parasitic shadow of the White Dargah. The terrifying midnight trances and the unnatural bone-crushing grinding of teeth have never stopped. Every single Thursday night, without fail, the entity reclaims his body, turning their home into a living theater of cosmic horror. Nazia sends this account as an elderly mother whose spirit has been entirely broken by a quarter-century of unrelenting terror. She and Noman live in a state of perpetual, agonizing guilt. They realize now that their desperate, blinding desire to escape the judgmental whispers of the world drove them straight into a supernatural trap. They stepped across a boundary that should have never been crossed, offered a sacrifice on a threshold, guarded by the unseen, and paid for their miracle with the very sanity and soul of their only son. She leaves us with a chilling, solemn warning for anyone who seeks out miracles in the dark, isolated corners of this world. Be deeply careful what you beg for, and be even more careful where you offer your prayers, because some places do not belong to the living, and the entities that reside there never, ever give back what they take. Two terrifying journeys, two entirely different families, yet both left completely shattered by the same invisible, relentless force. From the modern, quiet streets of DOHS in Dhaka to the ancient, suffocating canopy of the Jinn Dargah in Sylhet, the lesson remains terrifyingly clear. The boundary between our world and the supernatural is razor thin, and once you invite the dark inside, it will dismantle your life brick by brick until there is absolutely nothing left but ash and silence. We must ask ourselves tonight, are the shadows in your own room truly empty? Or are they just waiting for the lights to go out, for that singular loud clap to echo in the dark before they step forward to claim their debt? Sleep well tonight, listeners, if you can. This is Midnight Static Files, signing off into the dark.